Yes, everybody, welcome back to Lilywhite Lounge, episode 6. Today we have a bit of a different episode, a very special guest, Jon Mackenzie of The Athletic. How you doing, John?
Yeah, great. Really excited to be on and chat about everything, really, about Spurs, but also football in general. So yeah, I'm looking forward
Yeah,
to it.
having you on, I think we are gonna touch on Spurs, but I also just want to touch on football more generally. I think it's a great opportunity to have some more general chat. Obviously, it's very Spurs focused. I do a lot of Spurs content, but I'm also obviously interested in football more broadly. Um, First of all, how's your weekend been? What have you been up to?
Yeah, good. Lots of writing. Currently writing a book at the moment, so having to fit that in when and where I can, and then obviously with the weekend. I technically my weekend is Friday, Saturday, so I spend most of Friday writing, and then Saturday, because it's early on in the season, I think I'm trying to get as much of the football in the Premier League into me as I can, just to see what's going on, keep up with that. And then Sundays, I technically work in the afternoon into the evening. So I start off with a five-a-side game on a Sunday morning just to get me going, and then come back, have a bath and some lunch, and then get into my working day. So yeah, just about to get working after this podcast. So yeah, it's been a good weekend.
Did you win your game?
We did win our game, yes. It was, I guess I've been out for about a month with a sprained ankle, which I've been rehabbing hard. So I did my first game back on Friday, and I was quite tentative in that one. But today, a little bit more energetic from me, I guess. And I almost forgotten that I'd done my ankle, which is maybe dangerous. I don't know, because I do think I have to be a little bit more careful for the next few months anyway. But yeah, good to run around. I'm very much a sort of sit in the middle and dictate play kind of midfielder in those games. So very much enjoyed it, and have everyone else running off around me rather than me have to do a load of the running.
Sounds similar to me, to be fair. I also had a game. We drew 0-0, 11 aside.
It's what I love to hear. Apparently, every time there's a 0-0, people are like, "Well, you'll have loved that as an out of possession sticker."
You wouldn't have loved this one, I tell you that. It was a proper Hackney Marshes 11 aside game.
Proper football.
First game of the season, so at least we got a clean sheet.
Oh, it's an opener.
Yeah, season opener. Newly promoted team who just sat back and wasted time, basically.
Did you feel as though you guys were not match sharp?
Yeah, our number 9 was away, and he's scores pretty much all our goals. So I think that was a massive miss. But yeah, we'll bounce back, I'm sure. It's pretty high level this year. There's a lot of good teams. So, and we wanted to go for the title. So, I mean, it's not a great start, but we'll see. We'll see. So yeah, I think let's just start with the West Ham game, because I know you watched it, and I'll give kind of my thoughts on the game, and then you can kind of give your input. So I think the first 20 minutes we struggled, really struggled to kind of create any real openings. I think West Ham were kind of on the front foot. And then there was a period just before half time where we at least started to advance into the final third. I don't think there was amazing patterns, but we were getting our advanced players on the ball at least. Kudus had a couple moments 1v1. Simmons was picking it up in the pockets and looked a little bit out of cohesion, but there was some nice kind of moments and positions he was picking up. And then we looked obviously a real threat from set pieces. I do think that's a combination of, I think we have looked very good from set pieces so far, but also West Ham have been very poor from set pieces, including I think their goalkeepers really struggled. And then obviously that there was that disallowed goal, which I have no idea why that was disallowed. But then obviously in the second half, similar story. I think we had control of the game without kind of creating that much, but we were definitely the one pushing. And then obviously that goal came from a set piece. And then the red card happened, and then it was kind of game done. I think it was a pretty frustrating for me in terms of, and there wasn't much to really go on in terms of our chance creation. But I do think at the end of the day, it was a 3-0 win, clean sheet again. I think defensively we look very strong. We defend our set pieces much better than we have previously. So yeah, again, for me there wasn't much to go off, especially with that red card. I think it kind of killed the game, and I was trying to look out for more in that second half, and then that was kind of done. What were your kind of initial thoughts on the game?
I pretty much agree with what you've said. I think in the first half, if it weren't for the set piece threat that you carried, it would have looked pretty stodgy, or it would have made for pretty stodgy viewing. And even in, I think, the sort of breakdowns from set pieces, those were the times when you felt the most dangerous. In terms of West Ham, this West Ham team are sort of weird. So they were very sort of passive in their mid block, and didn't make it particularly hard for you to progress the ball. So even when your build up wasn't looking particularly scintillating, you were still achieving progression. But I do think that the majority of your better scenarios and your set pieces came from going a little bit more direct down channel. So for the first goal, that comes from just a channel ball under pressure in your build up, and then it sort of breaks down, and you win the set piece from that. I think I mentioned this when we were chatting through the game yesterday, but it sort of feels like what you're looking like is like Arsenal, but slightly worse at build up, which I don't know, maybe that's incredibly offensive to Spurs fans. But having said that, Arsenal have become one of the most consistent teams at the top of the league. So it's very much a way of being able to play in modern football. And look, it's maybe worth us chatting a little bit about what actually is at stake in the modern game in terms of like the most sustainable and functional forms of ball progression, because I think that what's happened in recent years has been that there's been a sort of sea change from a tactical point of view. The landscape has changed, and you can play successful football without necessarily having like perfect build up, as long as you're able to achieve progression in certain ways. So I think in the last 15 years, obviously those 15 years have largely been dominated by Pep Guardiola, and his attitude was always control the game in possession by moving the ball cleanly through the thirds and arriving in the final third in the manner in which you want to construct your attacks. And I think due to a number of factors, it's become harder and harder to do that. I would say probably the largest factor is probably out of possession, that teams used to set up in these more sort of zonal mid blocks and allow themselves to open out pockets of space, which could then be accessed through generally positional ideas. So what I mean by that is just using the position of your players to generate these kind of advantages, where you're finding free players, creating free players, and then finding them, and then using them to play the ball through lines of pressure. But I think as time has gone on, we've seen most teams now moving towards much more man-oriented approaches out of possession, particularly in high pressing, right? So in build-up, very, very few teams are just going to allow you to possess the ball without trying to either funnel you one way or the other, or force you into playing the ball long or direct in certain ways. And we've seen that happening with Spurs in the last few games, right? The game against Bournemouth was essentially just Bournemouth funneling the play in certain ways, using it to create unfavourable long ball scenarios for Spurs, winning the first ball, recycling it, and going forward themselves, right? So that's what's at stake in modern football. And I think that what that means is that build-up ideas have changed. Now, build-up is now much more, for some teams, I think build-up is now much more about generating settled possession in your first few phases of build-up, in order that you can then play these more direct balls, potentially, or even do maybe the slightly more Roberto De Zerbi thing, which is create favourable conditions to have a tempo shift where you suddenly go from passing the ball around your back line, finding the player in the pockets or the space between the lines, and then having these quick direct attacks where suddenly like I say, it's a tempo change where you sort of unleash on the opponent really, really quickly. And I think that that's the sort of the sort of tactical framework that Thomas Frank is operating in. That's what he was doing with Brentford last season, right? This idea of moving the ball side to side until you generate some way of being able to destabilize the opponent and then go. And often last season it was Mikkel Damsgaard who would drop in and create a free player in the build-up because no one would track the 10, no centre-back would track the 10 deep enough. So you are going to create a free player somehow. And then from there, you then do your tempo shift and you, I mean, there's lots of different ways of doing it. Generally, Frank is doing it in the wide areas, right? So doing these double movements. So someone running deep, the other one coming short, try and create a destabilized back line, and then use your 10 who's received the ball to unpick that. So I don't know. I'm sort of hesitant to be too critical of Spurs in build-up because I think there is clearly a plan in build-up, and also it's modern tactical theory. Liverpool effectively won the league doing that last season. And I think as tactical analysts, we always have to sort of assess our priors, and our priors have been formed by like 15 years of Pep Guardiola, right? Playing intricate positional football through the lines of pressure, through against zonal systems, like I said. And this is a very different approach. So there's a sense in which I'll watch the game yesterday and just think, I just don't find this approach particularly sustainably good with respect to ball progression. And I think there's reasons why, and we'll talk about them as well, right, in terms of personnel that Spurs were using. But at the same time, like I had these same sorts of criticisms of Arsenal, as I mentioned. And I think Arsenal are very good at sustainably progressing the ball. They end up largely progressing in the wide areas, and then you create problems for yourself in terms of like how do you break down the low block that you effectively create, particularly when you're only accessing it in the wide areas. Often what ends up happening is you just cross the ball into the box a lot, which is what Spurs were doing a lot yesterday, I thought, particularly after the red card incident. At the same time, you're probably not going to generate as much chance value that way, but
with quantity with it, I assume.
Right, yeah, it's quantity, but also set pieces, right? And for Arsenal, you get the double whammy of one, when you're playing in that way, you generate more set pieces. If you're good at them, you can then create value for yourselves. And then two, I guess if you're good at set pieces and then you end up spamming crosses, you're sort of doing open play set pieces, right? So you sort of get that feedback loop of generating sorts of favourable environments for yourself. So that's the positive side. I guess the negative side is we've seen Arsenal now for 4 or 5 seasons finish in second place because they're not able to sustainably generate enough chances and they become reliant on finishing their set pieces in order to go ahead in games. And that's been something we've definitely seen under Frank at Spurs, right? It's like it's been a set piece that's got things going, and it's only then once you've got that set piece that it then starts opening out a little bit more. So yeah, I guess, I mean, the context is obviously like Spurs were very bad last season, and this is a much more sustainable way of playing. It's a much more like high floor way of playing. I guess the questions that I have and have had over the first few games of Thomas Frank have been much more about, okay, for a team like Spurs who have a squad who should be challenging for top 4, how sustainable is this? And I think that's the difficult thing for us assessing elite clubs, because you're never assessing an elite club or team on the basis of 90 minutes of football, because every elite side, regardless, should be able to beat anyone in their day. I mean, even under Postecoglou, you were beating City, right? So for me, the bigger question is like, how sustainable is this? And this flips it all back to what I've been talking about, which is like for the last 15 years, it's very easy to assess that, because Guardiola developed a way of playing football where you could control games enough to like consistently win. And I think what we're seeing now is the erosion of that kind of control. Teams are much more physical. Teams are going much more direct. It's much harder to rely on your rest defense to stop opponents from having like direct attacks. So we're in a very sort of like, we're not in Kansas anymore, Toto territory. And so it's harder, I think, for us to judge like what level or how good an elite side are. I mean, even with Liverpool last season, right? The Liverpool fans go mad because whenever analysts talk about them last season, there was a sort of sense that, well, they don't seem as good as a team who should be top of the league, right? And you've got all of the other big teams just falling away, not playing as well. Hard to know exactly what kind of level you have to be at to consistently win the league. But I think we're just entering that era where it's just going to be a bit more random. There's going to be different winners at the top. It's going to come down to momentum. It's going to come down to, variance, like having a good run of form and the rub of the green falling. I mean, we've seen that with Liverpool already this season. So that's a very long-winded way of answering a question. I think I've taken us all around the houses. But yeah, I think that's where I am with Spurs right now. It's like, this is clearly a sustainable way of playing to a level that Spurs will be happy playing and will want to play in the wake of last season, where it was obviously a massive disappointment. The big question, I suppose, for me is, how sustainably good will this be? And how often will we see those performances where you get a Bournemouth game where it's like, okay, suddenly a team knows how to play to our weaknesses, and suddenly we just don't look like we're offering anything, right? And that's something that's happened a little bit with Arsenal at times in the last few seasons. So, yeah, I think a really, really interesting sort of situation. And I'm maybe surprised that, like, I don't know, it just seems funny to me as a neutral to sort of look at the North London derby now as a sort of two teams trying to do similar things. And yeah, I don't know how that plays out as a concept amongst the fan bases of both teams, but the idea of them actually being very tactically similar or maybe moving in the same direction is kind of a fun one.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much all you've said there. I think I want to put some. Well, I want to actually ask you how much this is linked to tactical ideas and how much it's personnel, because for me, there's been a few issues. So I think obviously against Bournemouth, they funneled all the play towards Van de Ven and Spence, and I think that dynamic was really detrimental because Van de Ven has this like kind of one progressive pass in his locker, which is like a whipped down the line pass, which he's actually pretty good at, but he can't really play the infield pass. He's quite limited, I think, in terms of his passing. So I think he's good at kind of opening up onto his left foot and then playing wide. And I think Spence was kind of cramping a lot of his space and just having a kind of non-left footer there, I think kind of ruins the dynamics there. Yeah. I also think in terms of progression, obviously I think Romero is one of the best progressive passers in the world. And Bournemouth obviously knew that. And so they let kind of Van de Ven have a lot more of the ball. I think what Van de Ven could have done a lot better is carry into midfield. I think he's a great carrier. He's not a great passer. And I think part of the reason that he wasn't able to do that as much was, again, because the width wasn't there. So if you had a doggy kind of pull in that right winger really wide, then that opens that lane for him to step into and carry the ball into. So I think that's one thing I've been kind of negative about. I think Spence has been very, very good. I just think in the terms of the way our team has been built, I think it suits really having a proper left footer there. I think the other thing is that he can play that direct pass into his left winger as well. I think like that, because it's towards the left. I think we've lacked someone who can control the ball with a player up him. And because Brennan Johnson can't do that. So I think that was another personnel kind of issue. And then the last one I want to say is also Richarlison. I think Richarlison is decent back to goal, because at times we did go a bit more direct. But if you have someone like Solanke there, who's obviously injured, or even Kolo Muani, who's I think a slight upgrade with his back to goal than Richarlison, then suddenly if you do start playing more direct, then things potentially open up a bit more because you bypass press. And the last one is also that 10, which you talked about with Damsgaard. I was confused why Simmons was put on the left yesterday, because I think if you have Palhinha in there, you have Sarr in there, how are you meant to kind of access the advanced areas there? They're not progressive passers. I don't think Bergval's even really a progressive passer yet. I think he might grow into one. And so you need that central player. And I think the main issue has really been our central progression. And I want to know how much of what those issues are personnel issues and how much of those are tactical issues, you think?
Yeah, lots of interesting questions there. Maybe like starting with the meta topic of like, you're distinguishing there between personnel and tactics, right? And I think that's a distinction people often make. But, I am always going to push back and say the tactics and personnel are always like tied up, right? And that's almost the point of what you're saying here is like, if you're going to play this tactical system, how do you play Van de Ven and Spence on the same side? How do you play with your progressive 10 probably on the left wing? How do you play with your number 9 not being able to hold up long balls? How do you play with a winger who can't take the ball down when you're going to play channel balls, right? These are all personnel. Like, that's a tactical issue as much as it is a personnel one. If your players aren't going to fit the system, then it's a bad system. It's a bad tactical decision as much as it is a bad personnel decision. All of which you obviously know, but I'm just highlighting that because I think a lot of the time people do sort of suggest that, you have on the one hand players, on the other hand personnel. Now, on top of that, I think we are moving into a weird scenario, particularly in the Premier League, where and it's happened with Spurs this season. You look at that front line now, and Spurs have the possibility of playing, Xavi Simons. They've got Kudus, they've got Kolo Muani, who you mentioned. If you look at Spurs' best 20 players, you spent over 40 mil on each of them. Like, these are expensive players. And the big question, I think, in modern football, particularly at the top of the Premier League, is how do you fit all of these players into a team and make it work, right? Because obviously, like, the more good players you have, the more you can throw those players on the pitch and they can find solutions, like individually or in groups, using the, what tacticos call associative play, right? This idea that if you get a couple of good players together, they will recognize what it is that each of them are good at and play into those strengths. Like, weirdly, to bring it back to my five-a-side game this morning, there's a guy I play with in that game who he's a fine footballer. He's not a great footballer, but what I know about him is that he will always play pass and move. So he'll play the ball into me in the middle, and I could just play the bounce pass immediately and know that he'll be in there behind. Those sorts of practices are super important, right? When you've got individuals. But the problem is that, well, I guess you want to try and find every advantage, right? You want to get the benefit of individuals finding solutions, groups of players finding solutions, but also you want an overall tactical team solution as well. And I think that's a big question with Spurs right now is, obviously, Frank has taken his Brentford 2.0 system from last season and just sort of pasted it onto this team a little bit. And the big question is, well, two things. One of which is, how well do the players fit, as you've rightly pointed out. I guess the other one is like, well, Spurs don't want to be Brentford, but with good players, right? There has to be some kind of like adaptation of the system in order to raise the profile of that system to get more out of the players as well. And I think that's the kind of interesting one that I would be kind of maybe trying to put my finger on as a Spurs fan. But yeah, in terms of what you've talked about, like Van der Ven and Spence, that's like finding solutions in build up, right? So with Bournemouth, like you said, very, very obvious, keep the ball away from Romero, force the ball into Van der Ven, and then make sure that you're not allowing any escapes, right? So Richarlison dropping deep, always a Bournemouth either centre-back or centre midfielder on Richarlison to make sure that ball is not possible. Brennan Johnson, as you've said, is easier to defend in that respect as well. So what you're essentially doing is you're saying, fine, go on that side, we're going to go man-to-man, we're going to any solution that you then find is going to have to be individual or group solution. It's not going to be an overarching meta solution. The big question is, well, should a team like Spurs be that easy to just funnel in a build-up situation? Shouldn't you be working on, for example, things like, okay, if we get funneled on this side and most of our good build-up is going to, like, as you said, your progressive passer is Christian Romero. That's it. Who else is progressive passing out of the build-up unit? No one.
Porro to an extent,
yeah,
I think.
Porro. Yeah. But even with Porro, like, what you're getting with Porro is direct, like, channel balls, right? And yes, he's better at playing them. But in terms of like actual penetrative passes through the middle, it's Romero, and that's it, right? So your build-up structure has to, or your build-up method or approach has to be like, how do we find ways of maximizing Romero at this point, unless you can change the personnel, which, at this point, like, what can you do? You don't have them. So yeah, that's the sort of thing that I'd want to be seeing, I guess, in terms of like the next step for Frank, is being like, okay, when you're Brentford, it's fine for you to just be sort of fairly one-dimensional in your build-up and be like, okay, we'll move it this side, we'll go channel ball, we'll do double movements to try and create space, and then when it breaks down, we'll drop into a block. You can do that. You can do that over and over again at Brentford, and you'll lose a lot of games, but you'll win some games. And that's not the case for Spurs, right? Spurs have to win a game against West Ham away from home, albeit, and I know that Spurs don't have a great record away at West Ham, but like, even still, like you should be comfortably winning that game. And I think obviously you did comfortably win that game, but because of set pieces and red cards, rather than doing things in open play, which maximize your chances of creating sustainable chances over and over again. I mean, you had up until like the 75th, 80th minute, you had barely any open play XG, which, yeah, again, it didn't matter too much. But like, you're playing against West Ham, one of the worst teams out of possession have been in the last few seasons. This is a team who are in danger of going down, and it's a team who are down to 10 men for a chunk of the game, right? And I think those are the sorts of areas where you think, okay, fine, you comfortably win because of set piece reliance, and that's good, and you have the players to be able to do that. But what happens when you come up against those teams that can just stop you from getting any sort of, I mean, and it's happened again. I keep bringing up Arsenal, but like, how many games in the last few seasons have Arsenal lost to Fulham, or West Ham themselves, even, where it's basically just been, well, we're going to sit in. You're not going to be able to break us down. You're swinging crosses, but we're well set up to box defend, and that's that, right? So I think for me, I want to start seeing sort of some more sense that actually the tactical problems are being approached in a way where I'm seeing Frank experimenting with things and trying to find these solutions and being like, okay, I can rely more on the individual and group solutions that my players find because I have much better quality of player than I had at Brentford. So, yeah.
I think that's a good point, because I was actually gonna ask you about that, because he actually spoke, I think yesterday, about how it's a balance between having structure, but he also likes letting individual talents play. And so how much is it that he wants to kind of build this solid structure and rely on the fact that we will not concede many goals, and then let his attacking players win it in moments, I guess. And I think obviously previously we haven't had that attacking quality, but now with Simmons and with Kudus and potentially Kolo Muani, seeing how he kind of works out, it does feel a bit like that for me at the moment. It feels like, okay, we are going to be as solid as possible, and in most games we have the qualitative superiority. So we'll back ourselves to get a goal, and then once we do get a goal or a set piece, then Frank can kind of play what he wants to play, which is more transitional, attracting them onto you.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think that's going to be the general idea. But again, like, I sort of come back. Yeah, well, exactly. And I think that's why I keep bringing up Arsenal, right? Because the thing with Arsenal is what they're doing is they're trying to reduce the amount of goals in games, right? They're sort of defense first. And it's like, if we never concede goals, we're either going to draw or we're going to win, right? But the problem is that when you have that attitude, variance just really bites you, because it's like a single goal in it, right? So I'm a Leeds fan, and like Leeds are doing the same thing, but at the bottom of the table. We had a game against Everton to open the season where we were the right side of variance because we got a penalty. It was like a little bit of a soft penalty. We won that game 1-0. We played against Fulham yesterday. We did the same thing, right? Keeping goals low, and then we get bitten by variance because we concede a goal, right? And that becomes the problem. That and you know, the teams who've always done, I think, well in the past, at least at the top level of the elite European game, it's been the teams where it's like, okay, look at Liverpool at the moment, right? It's like, okay, we'll concede 2 goals every game, but we're scoring 3, we're scoring 4. And that, you know, if you score 3 or 4 goals, the odds are way higher of you getting more points, I think, than if you don't concede any goals, but you're struggling to score yourself. So that's what's at stake here. And I think, yeah, I guess, and you know, I have been mentioning Arsenal all the time. It's worth saying, like, Arsenal are very successful at building up. It's very funny to laugh at them because they like massively overload the first few phases. They look stodgy. They don't really generate a ton of like direct chances, but they progress the ball forward, right? And then they have to break down the low block that they allow themselves to create. Now, Arsenal, I think, are moving towards trying to be a bit more direct, right? It's pretty clear if you look at their transfer business and the way that they're playing. So it's clear that they've recognised there's an issue with being that sustainable in build up. If you have better players than the opponent, then you should be able to sustainably build up. And I think that's maybe the thing that worries me a little bit about Spurs, is that like in the games that we've seen so far, it's not been that Spurs have been necessarily that sustainable in their build up. It's just been that things have sort of gone the right way for them, right? So even in like the PSG game, 2 set pieces, and then what was the opening game of the season? Burnley. Yeah, and in that one, right, you relied on Richarlison scoring like an incredible goal to break the deadlock, right? And that came from Kudus having the ball in the wide area and crossing it in. Again, like, it's great, like you say, qualitative superiority. This sort of thing happens, but in the Premier League, it's just getting, I think, harder and harder to do that, because teams are just much better defensively. Teams are also way more worried about relegation from a financial point of view. So a lot of teams are just going to be happy to sit in and stodge out. And then it just comes down to, well, you know, if you are spamming the box, like most of these teams are already going to have like physical centre backs because they know that they're going to be spending a lot of time playing that way. So yeah. And I think you go through in the City game again, like nice direct goal to open things up. We know that City are like weak in those sort of direct defensive moments. And then once you were up, it was sort of like nice. You're in the perfect game state, and you're probably gonna win that game more times than not because of the way that you set up.
I think those games really don't really concern.
They don't mean anything from a tactical point of view.
No, because totally. I think that's what Frank is going to. Yeah. He's going to thrive on that. I think. Yeah. I want to actually, if you just literally talking about this, what kind of suggestions would you have in terms of solutions to what the issues are right now, and how do you think with the personnel that Spurs have, because they are 100% lacking a deep passer in midfield. Obviously, Romero can't pass himself. He is incredible at passing through the lines, but those gaps are harder to always, because you're passing through like 2 lines at times, and he is so good at it. But obviously teams will recognize that, and you also want a player to receive it off them and then play another progressive pass. Otherwise you're going to have to go so direct. So what are your kind of, just off the top of your head, kind of potential solutions there?
Yeah. I mean, this is maybe like the broader question. So a lot of my Spurs fans get really mad at me because I'll watch Spurs win 3-0 or, you know, beat City 2-0 and be like, I just think there's big issues with this. There's things that I can see that I think will become more of a problem as time goes on. And they say to me, well, yeah, that's fine though. This is early days, right? There's going to be evolution. Frank's going to get the pieces in. There's a lot of like late signings in the window. Yeah. And look, I think that's totally an understandable way to think about this. Obviously, you should think about that because football is a game which invites, you know, familiarity. Like the more you play with players, like I talked about it before, like I play with the same guy in 5-a-side enough now to know the way that he plays, and you know that's just me playing in Brixton on a Sunday morning, right? Imagine if you're training with a guy every day, you're playing all the time together. Those sorts of relationships are incredibly important in football, and you know, I think certainly in the last few years, I think tactical analysts like myself have been in danger of undervaluing how much those things are, how important those things are. But at the same time, I think, well, you know, that evolution always happens within a framework, right? And I think that the issue that I have when people just say blanket statements like, well, you know, this coach should improve, etc., is that, well, I want to know what the framework is. Like, well, I want to know within which context that evolution is going to take place. So we talked about this yesterday. I mentioned Luis Enrique, right? Where previously I've been quite critical of Luis Enrique, just for the way that his teams play. I've always had him down as being a guy whose teams have tended to play like quite rigid positional stuff, and so as a result have shown a lot of the sort of con sides of playing positional football, right? Which is, you know, it does become very predictable. It becomes too rigid. The players are often too far apart and can't relate in the way that we've talked about. And what you end up getting is sort of often just a bit of a stodgy mess. But actually what we saw in the switch, I mean, even last season, it was midway through where where they started playing Ousmane Dembele as a striker, and then we had that incredible midfield where they can play, Fabian Ruiz, Vitinha, João Neves, or Desiree Doué in this incredibly flexible midfield where they're constantly creating space by moving, which is important, right? In the man-to-man game that we've talked about now, the spaces aren't there to be found. The spaces are there to be created and then found. And they found a way of playing a modern style of positional football, which won them the Champions League in the end, right? So I sort of had to eat humble pie on that, right? And I think, the reason why I'd undervalued him is because I hadn't thought through the potential for evolution within the system that they were working in. And I think when it comes to someone like Frank, evolution within the system he's working in will get you so far. I don't think it will take you to the top, which is where Spurs want to be. So what we're talking about then is not evolution within the system, it's evolution across systems. And I think that's why maybe I'm a little bit more pessimistic about the possibility of him just immediately finding that, because what we're talking about is a system where like the ball progression is very sort of set. It's very rigid. And if you look at Thomas Frank teams over the last few seasons, all of the progressive numbers are coming from the number 10 and from the fullbacks. Yeah. And like we talk about Christian Romero, I absolutely agree with him. Incredibly undervalued progressive passer. It was yesterday. He was incredible in the second half, but it's because you were playing against 10 men, right? So the spaces opened out a lot more, and so he was able to get a lot more progressive passing in there. But the reality is, I think that for Thomas Frank teams, so much of what's going to happen is the ball goes out to fullbacks. You move around the back line, and then one of the fullbacks will pick a time to go long, either based on an opportunity has opened out, or we're under so much pressure. The safe thing to do here is channel ball it and hope for the best. And I think that then means, well, why would you have players in the center of the pitch if that's the way that you're progressing the ball, right? So you want to have those overloads in the wide areas because it gives you, one, the capacity to win balls first time, win second balls, and then counter press if you don't win it. And so what you end up, if you watch the games that Spurs have played so far, then the center very quickly becomes empty, and then suddenly you're like, well, of course they're not going to try and progress it through the middle because there's no one there, right? So for me, if you really want to solve those kind of problems, you have to have some. And again, maybe this is not an issue. Maybe Frank is just happy to progress the ball in wide areas, thinks it's sustainable enough to do, and like on the basis of what we've seen so far, you can make that argument quite comfortably.
Just quickly, do you think that that's why he opted for someone like Palhinha in midfield, because he doesn't value central progression as highly as other managers? And also, is there a world where, I know that channel ball is a very predictable and not high success pass. It has to be perfect often. But in terms of Kudus and potentially Kolo Muani, they are two of the best like dual winning. If you want to ping a channel pass to anyone, I think it's those two players. I don't know if Kolo Muani is going to play left, but he might do. But
I think he should. I agree with you in that.
Yeah. In terms of Kudus will make a kind of 70-30 ball in their favor, 50-50 always, because he's so strong, so quick, so good at retaining the ball. So do you think that personnel slightly helps? And two, do you think that's why he opted for a non-passer in midfield?
Yeah, I mean, and I think this is precisely it, right? It's like when people are saying to me, well, I think that Frank is going to evolve. Yeah, he'll evolve within the system. And what is that? What does that look like? It looks like personnel where they're better at doing the things that he needs them to do, which is fine. But the problem is that when you're that predictable, when everyone comes up against Spurs and they're like, well, what are Spurs going to do? Well, they're going to try and progress the ball in the wide channels. I mean, obviously, to an extent, this is true with every tactical system, right? And the idea is that you're better at progressing in the ball in the wide channels than the opponent are at defending. But if you're signing players like Kudus and Kolo Muani that suggest that he wants to carry on playing the way that he does, that to me doesn't give any sort of indication that what he thinks is the solution here is like evolving across tactical systems. And I think, the teams that are always the most dangerous are the teams where they have tactical diversity, right? Where if you're progressing the ball, you've got the option of playing it through the middle or down either side. Like we've seen this with Arsenal again, right? In the last few seasons, Arsenal, all of their ball progression has basically taken place. Their threatening ball progression has happened on the right. It's not even that they're progressing in the wide areas. It's that which side the pitch they're going down, right? Which is fine, right? It's fine if you have like some kind of phenom on the left-hand side. And maybe, you know, Arsenal will become more dangerous now that they've got the option of playing Madueke or Eze over on that side. But like for Arsenal, teams can just overload on their left to stop Arsenal's right from being as dangerous. And they know that they don't have to protect the middle as much because Arsenal aren't going to go through there. And they also know that they're probably going to be able to defend against Trossard or Gabriel Martinelli, right? And I think that becomes the issue then, is that you're then if you don't have that tactical diversity, you're at the whim of the opponent being good enough to defend what you're good at. And when that happens, like in the Bournemouth game, suddenly it's like, well, we don't have anything. We don't have any solutions whatsoever, right? And I think that's, for me, that's what's going to determine whether or not Thomas Frank has evolved, whether or not he can start. And you know, that then means, well, we don't overload the wide areas. We don't spend all of our time trying to achieve progression in the wide areas. We also have the threat of going through the center as well.
Why just quickly, why wouldn't, like, just as a manager point of view, obviously he can recognize this. Why would he be against potentially having different ways of progressing?
I don't think he would necessarily be against that, but I think, you know, it's become incredibly hard to progress the ball through central spaces, right? Teams are blocking out, and so you're going to try and find the spaces where players aren't, right? Which is in the wide areas. But I think the point of what I'm trying to say here is more that when you become so obvious that you're not even trying to inhabit those central spaces, you're just making the opponent's job so much easier. And again, like you said, we've not even talked about like not having progressive passes in the pivot for Frank either. So again, it's like, well, there's no threat that even if a pivot gets the ball, they're going to suddenly play it through the lines and suddenly, you know, take us apart in that way. And I think that's sort of what I want to see. I don't want to see Frank being like, well, this is what we did at Brentford, so let's just do that, but with better players, because the whole point of having better players is you can do more tactically diverse things, right? And I think that's maybe the concern that I have with Frank, that at the moment it just feels a bit too much like, let's just carry this tried and tested formula to the plateau level of that system, rather than thinking, okay, well, how can we make this harder for opponents if they find a solution to us, and you know, if that doesn't work, then we do something else, and we're constantly keeping the opponent on their toes, which is what all of the great managers at the top level do. And I guess my caveat to that would be, like we discussed, is that we came 17th last season. Maybe he's come in and said, let me basically be solid, set foundations. But yeah, I do agree. But I think it's where we're at right now is we're obviously not fighting for a title. I think the aim is probably top 4. Yeah.
And I think with the way that we're playing and the quality we have, that's very possible, especially with the kind of Villa, kind of Forest. Those guys are kind of regretting.
Even Newcastle, I think.
Newcastle,
dropping off.
So I think that's definitely possible, and maybe that's what the target is.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think, I mean, I could speak about this all day, but I know we've got a lot of questions. So
sorry, I've rambled on so much.
The questions will cover probably a lot of this as well. So that's
it's maybe worth saying as well. Like, I do think that, like, the first season just has to be solid, and then you build on top of that. I suppose the only thing I'm saying is that it does feel as though the signings that have been made have been expensive signings that fit profiles for what he's doing now, which, you know, maybe they change next summer and they bring in different kind of profiles.
Well, I guess if they go big on a potential pivot player next season, that might.
But at the moment, I believe Palhinha's only on loan, right, for a season.
Yeah.
So.
I think it makes a lot of sense with the midfields he selected and the midfields that have been built by the transfer window, where they are just runners. Like, barring Bergval's obviously got a bit for sure, and he's got a lot of good carrying ability, and I think he will become a lot more of a progressive passer as well. But he's 19. Sarr is obviously an incredible runner, and a good carrier. And then Bentancur is a very safe player, very kind of secure, but doesn't really progress it. And then obviously Palhinha is more of an out of possession player. So it seems like what we're discussing is what he's going for.
Yeah.
Okay, let me go on to this question. Okay. We'll start with this one because there's been a lot of, as you've probably seen, a lot of Palhinha discussion.
Yeah.
So I'm going to get this one out of the way. Is Palhinha Tottenham's best summer signing?
No,
That's one question you get.
no is the answer to that.
And who would you have down as the best?
Well, I mean, I think, the players in the attacking areas we've talked about where they're, so Kudus, for the reasons where you talked about the fact that he takes like 70-30 like channel balls and makes them 50-50. That's incredibly important. If you're struggling for ball progression, it's just like cheat code stuff. Xavi Simons, like you said, played on the left. Neither of us really understand that because he seems like the perfect player to do that, dropping in and at least offering some kind of progression through the midfield. And I suspect he'll probably end up moving into that kind of area.
I think it was probably a first game. It's going to be intense, London derby probably, and then eventually I think, especially if he wants to integrate Kolo Muani into the team, I think that
the reality is the biggest loss is James Maddison, right? I think James Maddison is the perfect sort of player that you're missing, and I think James Maddison is the sort of player where Thomas Frank hasn't really had the opportunity of working with someone like that, right? And I think that can be a sort of catalyst for him evolving, right? Is that working with that kind of elite level player will change his view about how you achieve some of the issues that we've been talking about, right? So I think Maddison coming back will be super important for Spurs. But with Palhinha, I don't know. It seems like a lot of hot air in the discussions about that because the reality is, okay, great. He's a great player. He's really good at what he does. But the reason why the fan base love it is because they're like, we made a big signing and it's nice to make big signings. But like the reality is he's a player who got signed by Bayern Munich to play the role that you're using him in, and they barely played him because he wasn't up to the level, right? And I don't think that's too controversial to say. The reality is that like world-class players, which I think he is, whatever world-class means, like there's things that he does that very few players in the world can do. That's what I mean by world class. The problem is that the thing that he does that he's world class are much more useful for a team like Fulham than they are for a team like Spurs. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. That's not to say that like he won't be important for Spurs, but like the games where he's going to be important for Spurs are going to be so much smaller than the games where Kudus is going to be important for Spurs, or Simmons is going to be important for Spurs, or Maddison is going to be important for Spurs.
I also want to add on Palhinha. I think there's certain scenarios where he could play for a top team in my eyes, and it's more the Casemiro type role at Real Madrid for all those years where you have two incredible passers next to him, incredible progressors. The issue is that Spurs haven't built a team that allows you to kind of shoehorn someone like Palhinha in, who's there purely for our possession. And then I wouldn't, that's not my preferred kind of player to have there, especially in games where we're dominating the ball. If we did have an Adam Wharton next to him or someone like that who can consistently progress the ball, then it's less of an issue. But I think the fact that we've struggled with that already and then you're adding that into it, I think is my issue.
And I guess I would even push back and say, well, even because Casemiro has progressive passing in it. And that's the difference, right? It's like, yes, Casemiro on the ball is like often not the level that you would want a midfielder to be. It's offset by the fact that, like you said, that he had Kroos and and Modric playing next to him for most of the time. But he also did have that ability to play progressive passes when needed. And, that's a patchy. That's a player with weaknesses in certain areas that you overcome. Whereas with Palhinha, I just think it's very clear that he is one kind of player. And if you have the option as an elite team to get a more rounded player, they're always just going to be a better option because you then have to start doing things where one player is covering for another. And you're losing something from that. You're reducing another player in order to make the player that you have elsewhere functional. And I think the solution should always just be sort of like you're adding players together and the result is aggregated rather than like, okay, well, we've got this player, we just got these weaknesses, so we'll cover them with this player. But that means that this player now has slightly less of an upside than they would have done if they weren't like tied to this other player. So yeah, I think your takes on Palhinha have been good. And you should, ball, man. You should have faith in them.
Okay. This is from John and another John. Frank is praised for his adaptability, but if he manages to evolve at Tottenham, would you expect it to be his out of possession game or his possession game first?
This is a really good question, actually. I really like this. It's funny because I do think that the weaknesses that I was maybe a bit more worried about with Frank were probably the out of possession ones, largely because I think the out of possession ones like are tied up with again, the concept of control. First game as well against PSG, it was just like a textbook example of like get ahead with 2 set pieces, but then lose any sense of like possession control and territorial control to the extent that the opposition can just like chip away until they score. And I think that's the worry that I have. And I think, that people talk about Frank as being adaptable, and I don't really know what people mean by that. I mean, I guess they mean that he can set a team up to play with a back 5 or with a back 4, depending on like how it suits the game.
He evolved that Brentford team to be one thing into another thing. So
that's fair, I think. But I also kind of think that, people use it to be like, oh, well, sometimes he presses high and then sometimes he drops deep. I think that's true. But then I think Sean Dyche does that as well, right? And I don't think that people would, I don't think people would be flattered by that comparison. And so, yeah, I guess for me, so Frank, yeah, he can press high, but then I do think that in those situations where he presses high, once the press is broken, the solution is just drop into a low block. And he doesn't ever really do the mid block thing that much. It's sort of like a lower block or a high press into a lower block. And I think that's fine. Again, when you're Brentford, you'll cause teams problems playing that way, but you give up so much control and particularly like territorial control playing like that you can, and there was plenty of examples of it last season where Brentford just defend too deep. They get compact when they're played, when the opponent is squeezing them into the final third. They don't decompress quickly enough, and as a result teams are just constantly winning the balls coming back out, and then you end up in this cycle of death where you just can't get out. So that was one of the areas I've been a little bit worried about with Frank. But yeah, I think that the evolution will, I don't know, it's a good question. I don't know which one would have to occur first, but I think maybe the out of possession one is the one where it will have to evolve, because otherwise you just put yourself, and arguably like there has been already a little bit of an evolution moving away from being so passive than they were in the PSG game to the subsequent games. But again, it's like the game so far just so hard to read, man. It's like Burnley, can't really read into that. City, like you said, it's one of those ones where you can play underdog football, and City is so vulnerable to teams like Spurs. And then it's like the Bournemouth game, like it's kind of hard to read into that from like any point of view from Spurs. And then the West Ham game is like, the
red card
the red card changes it, and like arguably West Ham were like in the game for until the apart from set pieces, until that red card happened. So I think it remains to be seen what's going to happen there. It'll be interesting to see what happens when you come up against a big team like a Liverpool or an Arsenal, and how well you sort of compete in that game. But yeah, I definitely think that the in possession has to evolve if Frank is to get to the level where people want him and expect him to be at. And I suspect that the out of possession probably does too, but it will go under the radar a little bit more because people don't care about that sort of thing. It's harder to read as well. It's much harder to assess.
I struggle a lot.
I struggle. We all struggle. It's hard. It's hard work.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to do a couple more Spurs, and then we've got a couple general ones. So, just who do you think is our most underrated player? Or underappreciated, maybe? Or goes under the radar, maybe?
Who do you think this is, by the way?
I'd say in terms of level, relative to level, I'd probably say amongst general football discourse, I'd probably say Romero. Because I think he still gets just the negative. He's rash and stuff, but I think he's our best player. In terms of someone who probably is slightly underappreciated, I'd probably I don't know. I'm going to go
tough,
Romero.
isn't it?
Maybe Porro. I think Porro doesn't get enough credit, but he also frustrates me a lot at times.
But I think all of your players are a bit like that, right? There's areas where they're like very good. I think it's probably James Maddison for me again. Like somehow he manages to be undervalued, but I don't know. You watch the games where he comes on last season, and just he changes the game from being like, okay, we're at parity with this team, to being like, okay, we're like the balance, the momentum has shifted.
And that's what I'm hoping from with all these kind of concerns. I do think if you had someone like Jay, the way he can just change a picture of a game with one little body swerve, and then it opens up, or yeah, we just give him the ball anywhere and stuff. And I'm hoping that Simmons can kind of become a bit of that, for sure. Okay, I'm going to do one more Spurs and then we'll move on. This is interesting. Why does Kudus lose the ball so often? Is it selfish play or poor final third decision making?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Veteran.
Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, he's been a player who's played for David Moyes the last few seasons, right? And the way that David Moyes, people love this when it's for a team like West Ham or like Everton, where you bring on your Jack Grealishes and your Kieran Dewsbury Hall and your Illiman and Dies and your obviously your Kudus and your Bowens and your Antonios, right? And people say, why didn't Pep Guardiola use Grealish like this, right? And I understand it. It's because, you know, you want to see a player like sort of being given the freedom to just do what they want to do. But you know, it comes at a cost, right? It's fine for a team like Everton or West Ham to be like chunking the ball long and having like maybe 4v6, but lots of space, and those players solving those problems as they go. Versus City, who have to, you know, when City have the ball, they're defending with the ball, which is what Everton aren't doing. So apparently Jack Grealish is on free when he plays for City, because when they have possession of the ball, there's certain strictures that are placed on what he does. Whereas, and you know, City will have 60% of possession, right? So it looks worse. Whereas when Jack Grealish is playing for Everton and they have to do 60% of his time is spent like zone or marking as a winger, that's apparently fine. It's fine to be on free in that situation. That's just the tactical context changes. What was the question? Why is Kudus losing the ball?
Why did he lose the ball so?
Yeah, because in the systems that he's played in before, he's been able to lose the ball, right? That's his job, is to generate chances. He probably doesn't have many players around him because they're underloaded against the opposition. And so, you know, you have those players to be creative, and you say, okay, you're going to lose the ball. We're set up to defend when you do. When you move to a club like Spurs, that I think that it should shift a little bit. I
also, at Spurs, I think if anything, he's the one that keeps the ball the most in terms of the way he protects it.
Yeah, and he brings it down as well, right?
Like we were just discussing, like the amount, the XG that's created from crossing is always low. So people often say, "Oh, he's such a bad crosser," about so many wingers, but it's like
it's hard to score crosses
when there's such a packed box. They're not high quality situations. So I think part of it as well is that he gets to the byline, he puts in a cross, and often it's cleared away. But I think that is 99% of
what do you want him to do?
Okay, I'm gonna.
But yeah, I do agree. It's sort of like when you are a team like Spurs, what you expect is your player like that to just constantly retain the ball. But it's like, I don't know. Even Kevin De Bruyne like loses the ball more often than not. Bruno Fernandes loses the ball more often than not. If you've got a creative player, you've just got to live with the fact that they're going to try and do creative things, and creative things often go wrong on a football.
I think Xavi Simons is also a bit like Bruno in that sense, that he will often force things at times, but. You've got to get the balance right. You've got to, if your player is doing that so much that you think it's a negative, then you stop them from doing it, or you give them certain strictures about when you want them to do it. And that's why Jack Grealish was in the reality that he was in, is because Guardiola's like, in these certain areas, you're free, right? You go 1v1 against a fullback, you're free to go at them and do whatever you want. Jack Grealish wasn't good enough to go around fullback statically 1v1. That's why people thought that he was disappointing at City. But what he's really good at is winning fouls, recycling possession. He did those things really well. Decent out of possession. He's a perfect Guardiola player in many respects, apart from the fact that he didn't have that 1v1. He's a cog in that system rather than what he was at Villa, which is.
And the reason why you do that is because those players are supporting better players. Jack Grealish wasn't the best player on that team, and so it was more important for him to do the little things right rather than, you know. And the same is true with Kudus, right, to a degree. When he was at West Ham, he's the best, one of the best players. So you let him do those things. It may change at Spurs now because he's one of the best players, and there's more better players. And so the question then becomes, how do you get the balance right so that you're getting the most out of your teammates as well as the most out of you? It's the reality of elite level football.
Okay, there's a question more generally. Is there any tactical reason why three at the back formations seem to be flawed in the long run at the top level? It seems like when a three at the back manager struggles, the formation often itself gets blamed, whereas manager using more traditional systems are more likely to have specific tactical flaws criticised.
Yeah, I mean, teams who are using back threes are like the reality of modern football is that what the best coaches do is they make it almost seem like they're cheating, right? Because it feels like they've got more players going forward and more players coming back. The easiest way of doing that, I suppose, is operating with more players in the center and pushing them up and dropping them back as and when you need. And the difficulty with back three formations is that you're generally starting with one of your players deeper, right? So the question is, how do you get those players forward? Back threes, back fours, whatever. Like the majority of modern teams will probably end up with some kind of situational back three in build up anyway. And the best back three coaches, I'm thinking mainly Inzaghi. Most of the time, if you actually look at his team in out of possession situations or in possession situations, they're basically in a back four anyway. So the best back three coaches are constantly trying to get to make their back five not a back five. And that's the long and short of it for me, I think, is that if you are going to play in that way, the benefits that you get are that you have overloads deeper, so you can step up in and out of possession. So your centre backs can step up depending on who's in the pocket to cover them, knowing that you've got a back four behind them. And then when you're going forward, one or other of them can get forward and help out, right? Or you can play them as play them as a fullback, and then the wing back becomes essentially another attacker, right? So the reality is that a lot of the teams who use a back three in the Premier League right now, you're talking like Crystal Palace, Graham Potter's West Ham, United, and there's another team who was doing it as well. Maybe I'm just forgetting. Wolves. Those teams are all in the same part of the table because essentially what they're doing is they're saying, well, we want to gamble the other way, right? We want to make sure that we're not getting caught out defensively, and then we'll find ways of getting our wing backs forward, right? Which is usually what happens. The reality is if you're playing a back three, you're playing with an extra centre back on the pitch, and that changes the dynamics as well. Right?
What Inzaghi does so well is those kind of rotations with players and Bastoni being able to basically be free and on the ball.
Yeah. And so I think you can do it. You can do it, but like I think that what people don't realise is those systems often end up looking very sort of back four-ish.
Yeah.
But with flexibility, right? So if you've got pockets on either side of your pivot or whatever, you can step your left centre back up into one and keep the right centre back when the ball's going that side, and then do the opposite, right? And it gives you the ability to cover those two spaces without having a centre midfielder moving from side to side, right? So that's the flexibility. There's downsides to that as well, right? Which is that your players can end up out of position, and like there's plenty of examples of Inter like being flexibly done to pieces because and the reason they do that, actually, I mean, I'm sort of going on a tangent, but like the part of the reason why Inter did that so much is because they didn't have ball carriers. Ball carriers are a really good way of breaking man-to-man pressure. Because they didn't have that, they had to use rotations in order to create space for themselves to be able to move the ball through the line. So, again, that was a tactical reality that was recognised by Inzaghi, and he used it to really good effect. But like, there's just so few good examples in the modern game. So in the last 10 years of elite coaches using back threes, it's like it's Inzaghi, it's like Alonso at Leverkusen, and even Conte has gone to a back four system now, right? So we're talking like 10 years ago when Chelsea win the Premier League in that 3-4-3, and that's nearly over 10 years ago, and Spurs for that season, and that's just the reality. It's very hard to get away with that kind of thing. And with Conte, I think he's had to move away from that now because he recognises that unless you're going to be like super flexible positionally, then it's hard to do. And he doesn't want to do that, so he's moved to a back four. So,
okay, I got one more question. This is from Josh Davis. How can you get value from a cross-heavy attacking setup when you don't necessarily have an aerially dominant forward?
Yeah, exactly.
Which was the bit of the reality yesterday, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, for sure. You try and get Richarlison on the pitch, I guess, is the solution to this. But I guess my answer would be you don't be a cross-heavy team, right? You try and find ways of generating more value, be it through cutbacks.
So because what I was going to say is even cutbacks in those situations, if you're playing against a low block, they're going to be it's going to be too packed to do that. Cutbacks work best when you're in transition, I guess, and there's more space.
Yeah, agreed. But at the same time, I think if you can access the box through those lower crosses,
It's always better.
it's always better. Yeah, and I think even if you end up with a stramash and the ball pops out, like, I mean, it's basically what happened yesterday for Van der Ven's goal, right? Is that Boval took a really heavy touch, but because Van der Ven was there, he could just pop it in, right? At least you're giving yourself the ability to do that rather. As soon as you're aerially lifting the ball into the box, I just think, one, your accuracy drops right down. You're adding a third dimension, right? If you just play a cutback and you're literally, it's just like the direction forward and the X and Y axis. That's what you're playing with. As soon as you lift it off the floor, you're like adding the Z axis, and it's like, it changes everything. It makes it much less likely for you to, one, be able. It's much harder for you to meet that ball because you have to read the flight as well as the direction.
Yeah.
And also, like, the momentum changes, and you have to generate power in a completely different way. There's a reason why XG values are just so much lower when it comes from headed chances, right? Because it's just much harder to do. So yeah, I think that's the reality of it. And, you know, again, this is an issue that Brentford had the last few seasons, is that when they come up against a low block, they can't really do anything. They swing it around one way or the other, and then eventually someone just spams it into the box. And against Premier League sides now, you would hope that most of them would be able to defend those areas pretty well, particularly the teams who are going to fall into a low block.
Well, that's been great. We normally end our podcast with recommending something for people to check out, whether that's football related or not. Often, I think so far we've been all non-football related. So if you have anything, I'm trying to think of what I can recommend.
I would recommend, so City have just signed Donnarumma, and I think it's a really tactically interesting move, that. And it's one of these debates like the Polinia debate, where I think it sort of polarizes people. But Luke Nobbins, L Nobbins on Twitter, has made a YouTube video about basically what's at stake with City signing Donnarumma. I think it's a really good video. So yeah, go and check that out. I think his Twitter handle is at L Nobbins, Nobbins. So check that out.
Perfect. I'm going to just recommend a restaurant that I went to called Singburi in Shoreditch, which is Thai food, but really amazing. It's quite hard to get a table there at the moment, I think, because there's a lot of hype around it. But it was a family-run restaurant originally in Leighton, and it blew up. I think some kind of food critic went there randomly and wrote a review on it, and then it went crazy. But it was such a small restaurant that their phones, you just couldn't get through to them. They were just constantly engaged. And then I think they realized they needed to scale up, so they've now got this big one in Shoreditch. But that was unbelievable. So go check
if I could do a non-football one,
go on.
I've literally spent the weekend watching an old BBC series, which is on ITV right now, ITVX, called Our Friends in the North. So it's from the 90s. And it's just, I don't know, like, it really, I guess I'm from the North, so maybe it affected me in a way that it wouldn't to other people. But this was a series which launched the career of Daniel Craig, Christopher Eccleston, Gina McKee, is that her name? Something like that. And Mark Strong, who are all like very famous actors now. So, and it's just like, it blew my mind. It so basically follows four kids from Newcastle across 31 years of history, and each episode is like a fast forward, like maybe 4 or 5 years, and it follows them through a pretty miserable existence, to be honest. But I found it really interesting because it sort of tells the political history of the UK from essentially like the 1970s through to 1995, and I found it incredible watching. So it's free on ITV. So if anyone thinks that's interesting, then
I'll check that out for sure. I mean, there's been a lot of TV and film discussion so far on this podcast, so that's fitting the kind of bill. Thank you so much for coming on. I'll definitely be requesting you back on at some point. Probably when we get a bit more idea about what's going on in the league. And there's so much more I think we can discuss, so I'll definitely have you back on. But yeah, everyone, thank you for listening. Make sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel at Lilywhite Lab as well, with more kind of shorter breakdowns. Go check out Jon's work as well. Where can they find you, Jon?
Yeah, Twitter at Jon_Mackenzie or at The Athletic FC. Most of my videos go up there. So you should find my stuff one way or the other that way.
Thanks very much, everybody, and come on, you Spurs.